Hey, Low Code Approach listeners, this is Wendy Haddad. Before we jump into this week's episode, I wanted to let you know that we are starting to plan for the next season, and we want to make sure we hear from you on what is most important and relevant in terms of the topics that we'll be choosing. So if you could open a web browser and pop over to aka.ms low code topic request, that's aka.ms/low code topic request, all one word. Fill out that brief survey on what topics and what subjects, what guests you might want to hear from. And who knows, maybe it'll make it into the next season of the podcast. Thanks so much and happy listening.
Hey everybody, welcome to a new episode of The Low Code Approach. I'm Sean Feeney, Senior Product Marketing Manager on Power Platform, and today I'm joined with...
I'm Wendy Haddad. I am a Senior Cloud Solution Architect and Delivery Lead and a former customer of Microsoft, and I am joined by...
In a rare instance, I will most likely be Dr. Yes today as we introduce our good friend Hazim. So with that said, my name is Ken Aguilard, and over to you, Hazim, to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hazim. I'm a Principal Product Manager, part of the Scale Group within Microsoft.
All right,
Hazim, how did you bribed Ken to say Dr. Yes? So I want to know what the secret was.
I'll tell you, because everyone should be saying yes to using Hazim's new feature, environment routing.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Ken, you know what? You're right. Hazim, can you tell us what environment routing is and what is the problem that environment routing at a high level before we start really kicking the tires on this? What does it solve?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I should start by just giving a quick overview of what managed environment is, because managed environment routing is part of managed environment. And managed environment mainly is a suite of premium governance features that allow admins to have more control with less effort and have more insights over Power Platform. And environment routing is one of the managed environment features. And basically, it also allows admins to have more control over the placement of their makers into environments other than the default environment. The current version that we have today supports the placement of new makers only, but this will change soon. And I'm sure that we'll touch on that more. And then all of the new makers, once the admins turn on environment routing, are going to be placed into their own individual developer environment instead of going to the default environment. So for instance, when we have a new maker in your organization that is visiting the maker portal for the first time, they end up landing into their own personal developer environment. And then this is where they can start all of their making and innovation.
Great points. And I'm glad that you set up that and said all of those things. But we have someone among the three of us that is eager to engage with
I know. I have been so excited for this. So I'm sorry, Haz, I'm going to grill you a little bit. But before I do, I just want to back it up because we jumped right into managed environments, which I think was helpful context. But you talked about putting makers outside of the default environment. Why? Why do organizations need to consider that, or why should they care? And why are we not doing that by default now?
One of the common analogies that we've been using around for a while now is that when you think about something like OneDrive, for instance, each individual on an organization that are using Microsoft solutions, and then let's say any of the individuals start creating their own assets or their own documents. So it's probably very common for everyone now to think that, oh, my own assets and my own documents should live in my OneDrive. And this is where I should have access to. And then if I'm ready and I'm willing to share those assets with the rest of my organization, maybe I should actually either do this explicitly or moving them to another space where I'm start to collaborate with my colleagues. So we can think of SharePoint, for example. And if you just take this analogy and try to overlay it into the Power Platform, you can see that it's not necessarily the case today. You just like most of the makers, or mainly all of the makers, land into a common place and a common environment. And the notion behind the environment routing is to actually change that. So now, again, going back to the same analogy of OneDrive, think about like you as a new maker landing into your own space. And from an admin perspective, that would help to actually tailor and have more control and governance over those individual environments. So For instance, if you have a group of makers that need access to AI builder credit, or they have to have more elevated access and permissions, you as an admin can easily customize and tailor those access permissions, given that each individual is working out of their own environments, as opposed to applying permissions to everyone in a single common environment. So this is mainly the notion behind that initiative or feature.
So the hardest part, I think a lot of organizations struggle with when they're first trying to design or even just updating their governance policy is their environment strategy. So we're moving people's cheese again. Where are we routing to? Is it any environment? Is it only specific environments that they're putting in? Like, and how should they be rethinking their environment strategy because of this?
Yeah, I think I will just probably start with the word strategy, because I know it's typically an overused term, and like strategy mainly means that you're trying to achieve certain goals. And as the users and admins of Power Platform, there are given certain set of given values out of using the Power Platform, such as like compliance, security, and control, and so on. But also the admins, they have to have certain goals that they're trying to achieve that could potentially be very specific to their own organization. And again, using a different Microsoft product analogy, you can think of like, how do you structure your Azure Active Directory, or how do you structure your SharePoint websites, and so on. So this is mainly, I think, in that context, when you think about the strategy. And then going back to your question about what type of environments today are supported, we only support the routing to developer environments only, and for new makers only. But again, as I mentioned, this will soon be changed. We will provide more options for admins and organizations. And then in terms of how would that help in the strategy, you can think about placing your makers into their own individual space, and then that should ideally reduce your overhead of management. And I just refer to this as a management by exception, because now you as an admin, you don't have to intervene all the time, and you just need to provide any additional required or needed support. But otherwise, each individual maker are working on their own space. And also from a broader perspective in terms of governance, we have a set of other governance features that you should, or as an admin, you should take into consideration, because you cannot just think about the environment routing in isolation. And I'll probably refer to Ken in terms of other features that are currently in private preview as an example of that, like the environment group. So one of the common questions that we get, how can you scale this in terms of like creating more and more developer environments? And think about you as an admin being able to actually pre-configure all the required settings for the created environments. And again, subsequently, you don't have to worry about individually manage all of them. They just like have a sort of an auto configuration assigned to them, and then makers land for the first time there without not necessarily even realizing that they are landing into an individual environment. And then they potentially start from there, and imagine also that you can hook those environments into a pipeline. And subsequently, when those makers are ready to move on their solutions and creations into production, those environments would have been already hooked into a pipeline. So again, taking a step back and thinking of like the broader governance context, that this is how environment routing would fit into that.
I'm going to ask one more question before I have to hand over the mic to my colleagues temporarily. So again, why now, right? Because I think a lot of our listeners want to know why certain governance features weren't here from the beginning. And so what are the factors that influence the timing of this feature release? And what is coming that they should be planning for or thinking about?
Yeah, so I think generally speaking, one of the things that we're proud of is working closely with the community and customers. So mainly most of the features, and not only environment routing, evolves based on feedback and organization needs. And environment routing is one of those features that was introduced in response to the growing demand of more granular control and governance over the platform. So we have a set of existing features and tools and things like COE toolkit and other features that would enable admins to have more control. And even using the platform itself, like Power Automate, for instance, could be used by admins to customize the governance. But when you think about one of the values that we always refer to as part of managed environment, which is less effort. So in that context, environment routing provides more control for admins with less effort. They don't have to actually spend that much in terms of customizing or building custom solutions and so on, but they can have that value. And combining this with the rest of the features, and I know that this sounds like a repetition, but again, imagine that now you hook each individual environment to a pipeline, and you just simply route all of your makers to an environment, and it's automatically hooked into a pipeline. So as I mentioned, as the growing demand for more granular control and based on the customer feedback, that was the thinking behind the introduction of the default environment routing.
So Hazim, my friend, I'm going to put you in the hot seat here. What is the license that is needed for this? What does it cost? If I'm a customer and I'm looking at this, you just said it's part of managed environments. What is this going to do to my potential overall cost of Power Platform? Can you speak a little bit about that?
No, it's a great question, and it's a common one that we get. And I think this is why I mentioned environment routing is part of managed environment. So it's mainly a premium governance feature, or this is at least how we define it, which means that now all the makers in any managed environment are expected and required to have a premium license in order to enjoy the benefits of the managed environment. And I think there are two folds into the managed environment, certain value and benefits that are mainly for the admins and another set of benefits for the makers themselves. But given that this is mainly a feature centered around governance, so maybe just admins are getting the lion's share of the value out of the managed environment. And to just name a few things as an example of that, providing the ability of the admins to just have established a control in sharing limits for all the assets in any given managed environment. So let's say that they would like to allow only sharing with a certain security group, or even limit the sharing to none, which mainly means that no one can share any of the apps inside of any given or specific environment. And another example is the maker welcome message, which is in the event of admins are looking to provide certain guidance and to streamline the onboarding experience for their makers, they can put in and tailor a certain message for their makers so that when they first land into any of the managed environments, this is the first message that they see. So there are a number of features, potentially just drop a link or mention the AKA short link for anyone who's interested in learning more about all of the features, given that we are constantly updating them. But this is mainly the idea behind those premium features, and this is where the premium value is coming from.
So many of our customers, they're familiar with managed environments. But what we want to know is, where is routing heading? So what does the roadmap look like? What is going to be the value proposition for them if they only choose to say use routing, for example? We've heard for quite some time that the default is a problem. Community keeps saying it and so on. Keep me honest here, Hazim. We sort of sometimes say that this is a tool to help aid and route folks away from the default. So if we're looking at it strictly from, say, the developer environments, like, where else are we going with this? Are we going to be using Sandbox, Productions? What other integrations are we going to have with the platform? Can you speak a little to that?
Yeah, sure. And as I mentioned, we have to think about the broader context. So it's not necessarily any individual feature only that is going to change the world for the admins. It's ideally a set of features as part of managed environment and governance. What's going to drive the enhancement and streamline the organization environment strategy, as we refer to it. So in that context, I'll name a few features. I don't know, Ken, if you would be happy about that, but think about environment groups, which is currently in private preview in collaboration with environment routing. So imagine that you as an admin can now use both features together. And then for those who are not necessarily very familiar with the environment groups, I know, Ken, you have definitely much better definition than I do, but you can think of like environment groups as folder for environments to which you can apply a set of rules and policies, and then any newly created or existing environment that gets moved into the environment group end up inheriting those policies. So imagine that now you're able to route makers into a new environment and place that newly created environment in an environment group, and then where that environment has all of those policies automatically applied to them. So that helps in simplifying your environment strategy and reduce the overhead of management for you as an admin. So this is one of the things that we currently have in private preview. I'll let you just announce the AKA if it's still the private preview is still available. I don't know if you still allow more new tenants to join, but this is one of the things that we've been working on, and some additional new features that are coming up very soon. And this is hot out of the press as well. We are introducing the support of routing of existing and new makers as well. And given that we heard some feedback concerning the ability to apply filters or limit the routing to a specific group, we are introducing the ability to specify a certain security group as a filter for routing. So instead of just like routing all or none, or just like a binary selection as of today, imagine that you as an admin can specify a certain security group. Let's say that you have a special project running and you would like to only route all of those makers belonging to that special project. So you can actually apply this as a filter and select this security group and then route based on that. So the private preview is coming very soon. We are anticipating mid-February, and I would like to share the AKA for that. It's aka.ms/ER15, and it's not emergency room. It's just environment routing, ER15, if you are interested in rolling into the private preview.
But I think the admin should, try to treat this as a bit of an emergency and learn as much as they can about this feature as soon as possible. Now, Sean, I think you might have had some follow-up questions for everyone as well.
Yeah, I'm in this episode too. It's pretty cool. So you brought up the association between environment routing and groups and rules, and I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about maybe the more programmatic way of enforcing environment routing, right? So maybe I'm a partner in ISV or something, and I want to deploy these types of new features for a plethora of customers. Is there a programmatic way to do this, or is that on the roadmap, or do I have to go through the UI each and every time I need to go and enable these features?
Today, you can turn on and off environment routing through command line as well. The thing is that environment routing is a tenant level setting, so you don't necessarily need to do it for each and every environment. You just go once at the tenant level and you need to be a tenant admin. And then it's just, you turn it on, and yes, you can do it through a command line. As I mentioned, it doesn't have to be done through the UI only, but once this is turned on, all the newly created environments become managed, and you don't have to necessarily do anything else as an admin. I keep referring to the environment group, given that this is another powerful, I think, feature that we think there is a huge value in using both environment routing and environment group. But I believe that you can also still, or in the future, at least you'll be able to do this programmatically. So imagine that you would like to change the configuration or point to a different environment group. So you can still do that either through the UI as an admin or change that through the command line as well.
Sean, are you asking for API access to this?
Well, yeah, I mean, any way that I can programmatically do this, either API, command line, and also like we discussed, there's a way to turn it on. What happens if I turn this off? What's the ramifications by doing that?
Excellent question.
I'm glad that you asked this question, because we also get this question, quite common concern about managed environment. Like, what will happen if I turn it on and I turn it off? And this is sort of applicable for environment routing as well. So the short answer for the managed environment is like nothing will happen. And the reason for that is when you turn it on, let's say today, you as an admin made a decision to turn on, pick a number of environments and make them managed. There is no impact almost. And the reason for that is that we don't go back and change any of the existing assets. So we don't retrospectively go back and let's say you have an app that has been already shared with the entire organization, and then you make this environment where this app lives managed. We don't go back and assess, does it exceed the sharing limit or not? We just start the criteria and implementation and assessment on the day of the activation. So any newly created app or asset will adhere to those rules, but existing assets won't be impacted. Same story for environment routing when you think about it. Like, let's say that you turn it on, and again, if we talk about the current version, it's just like all new makers are going to be impacted only, but none of the existing maker will notice any change or difference. Of course, when we change that in the future, if let's say we include all makers, everyone is going to be impacted by that. But let's say that you went on as an admin and you turned it off. then you would just go back to the standard default behavior, which is all of your makers now going to be landing into the default environment instead of having their own personal dev environments. All of those environments that were created through the environment routing will continue to live and exist. So nothing will change, and they will continue to be managed unless you as an admin went on and manually changed that.
So two quick rapid fire questions to follow up on that. First one is, they're not losing access. If we turn this off, they're not losing access to environments. It's just not going to route them by default and they have to manually change it, right?
Correct. An excellent point. Yes. None of the makers will lose access. Nothing will change. It just all of the new makers that are coming are going to be landing to the default once this feature is switched off instead of having their own personal developer environments.
So you've mentioned the roadmap. You've said you've a private preview, more features are coming. You've talked about kind of enterprises trying this. I know Dr. Yes says yes, start implementing, but should they really do it now, or should they wait until these features are here? And what stage of their governance lifecycle should they be considering environment routing?
When you say here, Wendy, do you mean when they're generally available, or should they start using them in the preview?
I would say both, yes. So when it's generally available or the preview, should they wait until everything's fully launched? We always have new roadmap features coming. So I think there's always this what's on the horizon that's going to come that might influence this. And when should they just pull the trigger and start implementing?
Yeah, we definitely recommend that organizations should consider implementing this if and when they are ready to enforce governance measures for all of the new makers, because the advantage of turning on this now is that it would become much easier for you as an admin to streamline the entire onboarding process for your new makers. And as I mentioned, most of the new makers, they don't even know what an environment is. They just like land somewhere and then they start creating, assets and innovate and so on. So it will take a little bit of effort, and this is why we started with new makers versus existing, because if you happen to be an existing maker and you own assets and let's say you go every day to the default or to your purple environment, for instance, and now if your admin decides to move you somewhere, it will take a little bit more work and maybe consideration planning versus, let's say, for all of you new makers where they land on day one into their own personal space, and this is where they continue and everything is hooked for them. So this is why we recommend that, yes, if you're planning as an organization and thinking about your environment strategy, it would definitely be much easier and helpful for you to start with your new makers first and streamline their onboarding experience, and then start thinking about your existing makers.
So Hazim, if I were to maybe summarize and somewhat rephrase a little bit of that, environment routing could be seen as, say, the top of the funnel, as we say here sometimes. It allows for folks to start funneling those users into the platform and growing their adoption and so on in a very defined and governed and secure way when combined with the other toolings and things that we have in place. Now, I know, as Wendy so eloquently said, you talked about the roadmap, but what if we have existing users and like there are specific groups of users, maybe security groups of users that you want to route to specific production environments or sandboxes and things like that? Are there any plans on the horizon for us to do anything like that, in terms of like adopting this particular feature as a customer?
Yeah, so first of all, excellent summary, Ken. Yes, thank you for summarizing that. And in terms of like routing to non-developer environments, it's something that we are considering, but as I mentioned, from best practices recommendation as Microsoft, we still recommend that you as an organization consider placing individual makers into their own space. And what we are still considering for future option is how to even allow the creation of rules. So this is going to be a little bit more probably advanced and then provide more flexibility in terms of combining the different routing mechanism and applying more filtering criteria, if you will, for the routing instead of just like relying, for instance, on the security group only. So there is definitely more coming, but as I mentioned at the beginning, in terms of like getting involved more with the community, getting more feedback from customers, working with them and figuring out what's the optimal way forward. So ideally, we're looking at least as the next milestone to just go through the upcoming version and then look for more feedback and work from there.
Awesome. Well, hey, Hassan, thank you so much for sharing all the information and for withstanding the gauntlet of questions that we just put you through. We hope we haven't scared you away because we'd love to have you back on the show to talk more about environment routing, especially as new features come out and how organizations can look at deploying that within their organization and developing their environment strategy or refining their existing environment strategy. You mentioned a couple of AKAs. We'll keep those in the show notes so people can go and take a look at them. And I'm sure we'd love to see Dr. Yes on the podcast again, too. It was
a
a
nice
pleasure.
change.
Yeah, it was a
Yes.
very nice change. Big thumbs up there. Anyway, everybody, thank you so much for joining this podcast. We look forward to getting your thoughts on environment routing. Please feel free to hit those show notes and take a look at all the greatness that's involved. Thanks, everybody.